This video is about the illumination modes or controls for the LED indicator on a Zennio TMD switch. It picks up on something I was unaware of when I produced an earlier video on controlling an actuated light from a TMD. I'll put a link to that video here and or on the details below. We can see here within the parameters section of the TMD in ETS that there are several options under the LED illumination control. The default is regular. However, in the previous video I just mentioned the option was set to dedicated object. Let's see how these settings might appear when a TMD is configured with these different modes. From the user's perspective, when actuating a light using a button on a TMD, the LED associated with the button will likely appear in one of two ways. It will illuminate for an instant when pressed like this, and also illuminate for an instant when pressed when turning it off. This is the regular illumination mode. The other way the LED will behave is it will remain illuminated while the light is on, like this. This is what most likely occurs if the illumination control is set to state dependent. It's also likely to be the case if one of the other modes or controls is set, which I'll explain more about. Okay, so back to ETS. One of the key differences between the modes is whether the LEDs on the TMD are directly linked to the action of the associated button. For example, if we are in regular or state-dependent mode, then the LEDs are directly linked to the state of the associated button. However, if the illumination control is set to dedicated object, then the LED is somewhat independent of the associated button and controlled via a separate group object. So we can see this when we change the option from regular to dedicated object. A group object is added for each button that is activated. So let's do that and have a look what happens. If we have a look over it here on the left hand side, when we change, we will see that we've now got additional group objects. So I'll just repeat that back to regular, back into dedicated object. We have produced these additional group objects that are associated with the state of the LED. We can see this one for A1, A2, B1, B2. They occur because if I go into the configuration, I can see that they're selected. Likewise, I can see if I go into the configuration for the additional buttons which are down the bottom, I can see that we've got Z1 selected, and subsequently there's a LED group object for that. I could add an additional one. For example, if I clicked on Z2, I'm now going to get a group object for Z2 as well, or for the LED for that. I'm not going to explain how any of the group objects are configured, as I've done this in a previous video, and I'll have that in the links below. Suffice to say, the settings on the group objects that relate to each button are identical regardless of whether the regular, the state dependent or dedicated object is selected. Or at the very least, they're the same settings when controlling a light via a simple binary function. The group object which appear when we go into the dedicated object mode is obviously only available when we choose the dedicated object mode, and that was also described in the previous video that I've mentioned. However, there is another illumination mode setting I'll mention, and that's the fourth one listed. Every button pair is configured separately. If this option is selected, then we would need to go into the parameters for each button and choose from the options. So let's do that. Let's go into here. Now let's go into one of the buttons, and here we can choose between regular, state dependent or dedicated object. At the start of this video, I indicated that all my TMDs that I have been configuring and using were all set onto dedicated object. Having now trialed the various modes, I'm not sure this is what I would select if starting from scratch. I think I would select the option of every button pair is configured separately, this one here. This is because in most cases and for most buttons, I would probably select the state dependent. So let's go in as an example into one of the buttons. I would probably just leave it as state dependent and I'd have no need to control the LEDs separately. However, there are situations where I utilize the ability to display the state of something using one of the LEDs, but without activating the associated buttons. So for example, if I go down into these settings down here, we have, well, let's just take Z1 for example. The function's actually disabled, but I am now able to control the LED in both these instances. Even though the function is disabled, it has a LED group object which I can send telegrams to, and I can turn them on and off. And so I've used this in an example, or I've used this to illuminate a LED in various rooms around the house where I've got a TMD. If the garage door has been left open, that saves me from walking around to physically check whether the door is open. But I actually don't want the button to be active in all those other rooms, because I don't want to close the garage door without actually first checking that it's free of obstacles. So I just don't program that button itself to actuate the door, but I configure just the LED to display its status.